Welcome, everybody. Here we are back with our Roadburn special. And I am very, very happy to have one of the very important people behind the scenes with me tonight. So Becky, who is working closely with Walter, has joined us. Becky, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. You get the same question that everybody on this special gets. And what does Roadburn mean to you personally?
Well, Roadburn is a 4-day event that seems to stretch out and last in some way throughout the whole year. It's a source of inspiration for me, and for a lot of people that I know and a lot of people that come to Roadburn. It's a vessel into which I channel a lot of my time and energy and love, as do many others. There is a community that exists around Roadburn, and within that community I have found many great friends, and I've made great connections and had good times with a lot of people. I've also got work out of being a Roadburn. I mean, Roadburn is also my job. So I spend a lot of my time working on that, amongst other things. To me, it represents an expression of creativity. It provides a platform for artists to present their work to an open-minded audience. I think that probably covers most parts of it.
I like the multifaceted answer on that one. You say it's an inspiration for you. Can you explain that a little bit? In which way is Roadburn an inspiration?
Well, Roadburn existed before I was involved, and it's something special that I find. I find the sort of communion of music lovers and creators to be sort of an inspiring place to exist within. So yeah, I think it's a great event, but as I say, it's a 4-day event that seems or feels to last a lot longer and exist in many other ways outside of just the 4 days that the festival is happening. And to do that, I find it an inspiring place to work and an inspiring thing to participate in.
Do you still remember your first time at Roadburn?
Yes. It was in 2012. The first time I went to Roadburn, I only went for 1 day. And I think the first band that I saw was Knack Mystium at the main stage. And when I left my 1 day at Roadburn, I felt very much like I had left something behind. Like I definitely was very conscious that there was a festival continuing and I wasn't there and I wasn't part of it. So the next year I came and I stayed for 4 days, and the next year I came and I stayed for 4 days, and that was that. But yeah, so it was, I suppose there was probably, as there often is when you go somewhere new, maybe a moment of like hesitation and being unsure of a new environment. But pretty much from the get-go, I felt comfortable at Roadburn, and I continued to be. So yeah.
I think that's also something that you already hinted at in your first answer when you spoke about its community of people. Would you go as far as we're a community of outsiders?
Yeah, I guess so. I think, people find their community in lots of different ways, but there is a community that exists around Roadburn, and again, that was something that existed long before I was involved. But I think that a community is only as strong as its participants. Every person that is in a community contributes to the shape and the feel of that community.
You say that, you have now already stressed Roadburn has existed before you got involved. So let's ask, how did you get involved with the festival?
Well, I met Walter, I'm not sure which year it was, but one of those first couple of times that I came, and I've been a freelance publicist for a long time, and there was a band I was working with at the time, Hour of 13, who I really wanted to play Roadburn, and I think I had some conversations with Walter about that. So we sort of stayed in touch, and then I guess it must have been 2014. He came to London, where I was living at the time, and I think he was coming to see Godflesh. So we went to see Godflesh together, and he stayed at my house and slept on my sofa and befriended my cats. And we talked about Roadburn a lot more then. And a few months later, he called me out of the blue and asked if I would be interested in working for Roadburn. And I said yes without hesitation. And I went and told my partner very excitedly, I've been offered a job at Roadburn. And they were like, doing what? And I said, oh my God, I've got no idea. I just said yes without thinking. Hopefully it's something I know how to do. And it was something I knew how to do. So that was good. So yeah, I've been working there since 2014. 2015 was my first edition, sort of working there.
So what should we envision is your work at Roadburn? What do you do for Roadburn?
I don't think I have an official title, actually.
Yeah, that's also good, because official titles are usually just like blah, 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 blah. Facility manager.
I don't know. Yeah, it doesn't really mean much. So yeah, I don't know. My title would be quite long, I think, because it's various different components. So when I was first hired, the title that I had then was press and communications, or publicity and communications. And the communications part of that did some heavy lifting. I think it can be applied to many different things. So it was, I mean, the primary part of it was publicity for the festival, international publicity, and, you know, press releases. Communications was like social media, doing some of the write-ups for when we announced bands. That was kind of, my job has evolved almost every year. Like it's changed shape or taken on new responsibilities. So I'm not really sure when new bits came in, but like I also booked the side program at Roadburn, which is something that we do every year, which largely consists of panels or Q&As with artists or other relevant people to the Roadburn world. I have been on the booking team for the last year or so. The bookings team is Walter, who's the artistic director, and Joelle, who's one of the in-house bookers at the O13. So together we book the bands that play. And then I'm not really sure. I do various bits and pieces in between. I make most of the weekly playlists, continue to do socials, various things here and there. So I don't really know how you sum that up in a job title. So something along those lines. It's my job.
Something like a Jane of all trades, huh?
Something like that, yeah.
I think we should get one thing very clear at this very point, because I think it is a good point. We will also talk a little bit about controversy that has been surrounding our favorite festival in the world in the last couple of months. And I think we should make one thing clear. You are not the artistic director for Roadburn. That is still Mr. Heumakers. So it's not you who's making decisions, right?
No, I don't make decisions about the artistic direction of Roadburn. That is Walter. We have a lot of conversations about bands that are relevant to Roadburn and what direction things are going in, but Walter oversees all of that. The business part of Roadburn is handled by people at the O13, so that's not me either. All of those things that I just explained that I do, it feels like a big long list of things, but there are many people that make Roadburn what it is, and my role is just one small part of that. So yes, there's lots of other people that are decision makers along the way, and but yes, Walter oversees the artistic direction for sure.
That's also something that I, on the outsider's perspective, with maybe a little insight, want to point out to all those people who are saying negative things about Becky. She's not responsible. You know, if you want to blame somebody, blame the old guy. And otherwise we'll come to the diversity thing and to the immersiveness of the festival in a moment, I think we should all remember what Roadburn was 25 years ago, or 24 years ago. It was a festival for a very niche kind of music, but at that point was starting to grow. And I think people confuse it with something like, what should I say, Desert Fest or Freak Valley, festivals that really stick to one genre and do that very well. What Desert Fest does is fine, or what my friend Gavin is doing with Damnation up there in Northern England, also perfect. But it is different from what Roadburn was. And here we come to something that is important to me. Roadburn, what I always love about Roadburn is the announcements. And there are still, basically on every larger announcement, there are like a minimum 3 or 4 bands that I don't know, that I have to look up, that I have to get into. And so what I like about it is the vast scope of music that could be performed at Roadburn, and the highly diverse nature of the music. Roadburn is not just a stoner festival. Roadburn is not a black metal festival. Roadburn is not a grindcore festival, but Roadburn can be having artists from those backgrounds. Let's stick to the musical scope first for a second. Is that also something that strikes you about our Roadburn thing, this diversity, or do you say like, oh, the more psych bands, the better?
Yeah, Roadburn has a diverse lineup. I think it has, the whole time I've been involved, I would consider it to have always been a diverse festival. I think Walter has spoken quite often about how the festival grew from a festival that was centered around stoner rock and psych. And I think, I don't want to speak on his behalf, but from what the conversations I've had with him and things I've heard him saying to other people, he basically was driven to book the bands that he found most interesting and explore the scenes which he found the most progressive and relevant to what he wanted to do at Roadburn. And I think that ethos is still there, that still continues. Although, yes, there is less stoner rock, there is still plenty of psych. Although there is plenty of psych this year, which is not in a traditional sort of vein. Like, I think the boundaries between genres is somewhat blurred in many ways now. So yeah, I think Roadburn is still a forward-thinking festival as it always was, but the parameters of what fits at Roadburn has evolved over the years too. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yes. And I think we can also give you the same question that I gave Walter. Do you think that heaviness nowadays is defined by a certain emotional depth?
It can be. I think heaviness, the concept of like redefining heaviness came from it wasn't originally a phrase that was sort of coined by us. It came from a review on The Quietist where they were talking about what we were doing at Roadburn, and it was something that stuck and made sense and almost helped us to understand what we were doing, and kind of gave a sentence, like it gave a phrase to what we were doing. And yeah, heaviness can definitely be present in emotional weight, but it can also be in just very heavy music, which is still something that is represented at Roadburn. So yeah, redefining heaviness can, by its very definition, can be about making sense of it in various different forms and different ways.
Yeah. And I also think that this diversity shows in the fact that on the very same day you can, or in the very same festival, you can listen to an artist like Otayoni, and the day before you can listen to Ad Nauseam. So it is still a very, very heavy festival in a way, I think.
Yeah.
Something, when we speak about diversity, I think in the 21st century, 2023, we should also talk about diversity when it comes to gender, ethnicity, however we want to call it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
In our little pre-chat, you have mentioned that Roadburn did not sign something like a diversity brief, or let's say like a certain, that you do not want to have a certain quota of females on stage, or you do not want to have a certain quota of trans people on stage, but that it is important for you to book people like that. So can you express that a little bit? How does diversity, when it comes to that part of the definition, how does that play a role for Roadburn?
So what I was referring to is that there is a pledge that some festivals have signed, which is aiming towards gender parity on festival lineups, I think, by a certain date. And although I don't think there's anything wrong with that, it's not something that we subscribe to. I also do think that within some genres, it is easier to achieve that. Metal and its adjacent genres is not traditionally particularly friendly to non-males, which is changing, but still slower than I would like to see. But yeah, I think that what's more important than a pledge along those lines is to ensure that the people booking a festival are able to explore beyond the boundaries of their own lived experiences and embrace what artists are doing outside their own sort of frame of reference. So although we don't have a quota, there are lots of women and non-binary and trans artists that perform at Roadburn. But what we're looking for is the artists that are making music which is cutting edge, which is interesting, which is exciting, which is progressive, which is offering us something new, and that we feel is relevant to what we're doing at Roadburn. I think there is a lot of merit to representation as a whole, but I think that it's tied to the fact that, speaking on a personal level, I think that a lot of the work that needs to be done to achieve equality in almost any sense is tied to the education and socialization of children and teenagers, that they need to understand that what's in terms of like representation. I feel that representation is important to people of that age group, because I know that when I was a young music lover, seeing people that look like me doing things that I wanted to do one day gave me the belief that it was possible. So I do hope that young music fans see what we do at Roadburn and see some of the artists that we're presenting and realize that there is space for them in the future at Roadburn too. And that's something before these are artists, before they develop into artists and creators of their own, so they have the belief that it is possible. I think representation is really important for that reason. One thing that I have learned about issues of identity, it's really painful when somebody targets you or comes after you because of your beliefs or something about your identity. But I also feel that it's far less painful to absorb some of those blows on somebody else's behalf. So if people are uncomfortable or unaccepting of the diversity, if that's what we want to call it, on display in Roadburn lineups, then I think if they want to take aim at us for that, and if they object to that, then that's fine. Roadburn should be comfortable and a welcoming place for everybody, regardless of their background or their identity. And I think that goes for the people who are in the audience and the people that are on stage. We're not trying to fulfill a gender quota or any other kind of quota. We are simply booking the artists that we find most interesting. But I think that you can still do that with, at the same time, being cognizant of gender balance or realizing that we're not booking a diverse festival, and questioning that and questioning yourself is an important thing to do when you're doing anything creative. So that's my personal take on that.
Oh, totally fine. And I totally agree with that. I got two thoughts on that. One thing is, again, 24 years ago, there was this first version of Roadburn. It was a place for outsiders who didn't feel welcome in, let's say, the normal metal community.
Mm-hmm.
So if anybody doesn't like that, then you didn't get the point 24 years ago. And I know that people tend to become a little conservative the older they get. But maybe then Roadburn is exactly the thing for you, because it can challenge your tendency for conservative thinking. So remember why you got into this thing. And the second thing is a personal experience. And I totally agree with what Becky hints at. If you are complaining about artists with a diverse background, with a different kind of gender background, with a very personal story very, very often, being on a Roadburn stage, then that tells us more about you, the complainer, than about them, the booker. And here I have a personal example for that. Being a teacher, I very often go on school trips. And I love those. And I do those from the bottom of my heart. I love taking students outside their usual environment in order to learn something. And I still remember 2010, we did a school trip to Berlin with 9th graders. And there, with 9th graders, we have the usual limit of 0 alcohol. You drink anything, you go home. And so this is a very clear rule and a very defined rule. And we had an evening for the parents to get to know the program, to get to know the rules and all that stuff. And all of a sudden, there is one father who's jumping up and who very loudly proclaims, "Are you trying to forbid my son to drink alcohol for 72 hours? Silence. And then I looked at him and I only said, like, if your son doesn't last 72 hours without alcohol, then we have a very different problem here. And to apply that to Roadburn, if there is anybody out there who thinks that artists like Otai Oni, Nicole Dolganger, I always get the name wrong, excuse me, Nicole, or Backwash, or whatever names we got. If you have a problem with those people being on stage, then that tells us more about you than the festival. That was my little 2 cents on that.
Yes, I agree. I think that we ask sometimes a lot of our audience to trust us when we're booking bands for many reasons. We book, this is sort of diverging away a little bit from what you're talking about, I suppose, but it's still relevant that sometimes we book bands that are brand new, that are playing their first ever show at Roadburn. So we ask people to put their faith in us, that we're putting together a good lineup, one that makes sense. And that is based on stuff like that we're putting together a lineup that makes sense for in terms of genre, but also that we're presenting bands that are unknown to you. So yes, if you're leaning towards preferring to see stuff that you saw at Roadburn 20 years ago, and you would like to see the same bands that you saw at Roadburn even 5 years ago, and then you might not find what you're looking for with us.
Oh, come on. 5 years ago, we had Converge, we had Godspeed, we had Loop, I think we had Godflesh and Zola Jesus, and this is just and Bellwitch. So come on, these are 6 bands on the lineup that are not as diverse as can be, but very, very diverse. So
I just mean more that the lineup evolves every year.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
don't. We're not necessarily when we have the opportunity to book bands that we booked even 5 years ago. The the question then is sometimes, what are we going to present, or what are they wanting to do at the festival?
Exactly.
Because if you've especially sometimes if you've booked a band doing something very special at Roburn previously, does it make sense for them to come back and play a regular show a few years later? Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. So when I'm saying even booking the same bands that we booked 5 years ago, it's not just because Roburn 5 years ago is different to Roburn 15 or 20 years ago. It doesn't mean that it's going to stagnate. That the whole point is that it's always going to continue to evolve. So it's always going to attract new people that want to come and see our lineups, and it may mean that there are some people that don't find as much that they're looking for at Roburn, and that's natural, I think. But I think it's like, one thing I would say about people that have found less that they like on the Roburn lineup, especially if they are finding that difficult, or they feel let down by us, then I think, like, one thing, maybe I'm being too generous, I don't know, but I think it's quite an honor that people feel so connected to Roburn, and that they feel a bit of ownership over what Roburn is, because going back to what I said at the beginning, like, community is still part of this, and it's not a nice feeling to feel left out or to feel left behind. And so I can kind of understand it a bit, but again, I sort of think that doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily change the way we approach things, but I guess I can understand it a little bit. But if they still want to look for something that is new and we feel is exciting, if they want to put their trust in us, then we still believe that we're putting together a lineup that can deliver on that. And that there is so much out there to discover. I think that one of the greatest, like, joys of my job, and you know, working at Roburn is that it's literally part of my job to go and find new music and to figure out what works at Roburn. Obviously not alone, like, I do that alongside Walter and Joelle and other people, but there can never be too much. Like, I'll never be bored of doing that, and it's one of the greatest joys in my life, and so to get to do that as part of my work is an honor. I love doing it. There's no greater pleasure as far as I'm concerned.
Same here. Something that also strikes me about Roadburn, and that I love, and I have discussed that with a lot of my friends who I met for Roadburn, and we all share a feeling that Roadburn is not just 4 days. Roadburn is a very, very immersive thing that once you get hooked, you usually stay for a lot of reasons. One being the community, second being the great detail in booking, and third, and that is something that I would like to talk about briefly, Roadburn is a very immersive festival in the sense that from mid-September to mid-October, we are all waiting and, like, scratching our nails on our tables, like, when do we get first information? So from fall to April, we're already anxious for it. And I've met a lot of good friends through Roadburn, and we all have a WhatsApp group. And as soon as the news comes out, it doesn't take 5 minutes before any one of us is like, we got first names. And then there is the 4-day festival. And afterwards, we all have like a 2-week blues, post Roadburn blues, that everybody subscribed to. I guess you've said that, right? You were there for 1 day and you already had a Roadburn blues, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then that we built on the memories also because of something that Roadburn does very, very often, like the weekly playlists and communicating in between announcements or stuff like that. So is that also exactly part of your deal, to keep us busy, to bridge those gaps between the festival and the first announcements?
Yeah, again, I think that was something that was in place long before I came along, but I have become, I suppose, part of doing that. I think that as Walter has talked about this previously, that Roadburn was born from a blog where he and some friends essentially just wanted to share what music they were listening to. And Roadburn the Festival was an extension of that. It was about presenting those bands in a physical format. And that is, those two elements of it is still very key to what Roadburn does now, as far as I can see. So the festival itself is really important, but Roadburn as a sort of entity is something that people can, I don't know if participate is the right word, but they can engage with, even if they've never been to the festival. Like, of course, at this time of year, a lot of the posts that we make on our social media and so on is geared towards the festival itself, because we're communicating a lot of information. But in between that, I think that the sort of ethos of Roadburn and the passion of Roadburn is about like discovering new art and new music and sharing it. And so yeah, the playlists is one way of doing that. As I say, I do the majority of them, but there are a few people, Davey does some, and we sometimes have guest curators. But it's a way of communicating what we're listening to and what we find is interesting, because sometimes those artists that are making music that's fantastic, that we love, aren't suitable for Roadburn. They're too big, or they don't play live, and it's just another way of like sharing what we're discovering. So that sort of, I guess, community is a very like it conjures up different meanings for different people, but it's that community of like sharing that is present all year round. And we're just one part of that. Like, it may be centered around Roadburn, but what we discover is like when we're sharing it with other people, no different from when somebody else comes and we read something where somebody's saying, oh my God, I've discovered this new band, they're amazing. So it's that passion for wanting to share that helps create that year-round experience, I think.
Definitely. I just remembered something that I think a lot of parents teach their children. We also teach our daughter. Sharing is caring.
Yes.
So, first of all, Becky, thanks for all those wonderful insights, details, and opinions. I love that. But of course, I cannot let you go without sharing your, maybe, let's say, 5 most memorable Roadburn performances.
5.
Yeah, don't be like JJ, who sneaked all his 18 into his 5.
Okay. Okay. Let me think. I'm writing it down so I don't forget. Okay. I think I've got it. So I would choose Warning, playing in 2017, when they played Watching from a Distance in full on the main stage. That's one of my favorite albums, and it was something that I had wanted probably before I worked at Roadburn to see at Roadburn. And we had to be patient for it to happen. And it was amazing. I loved it. And it also holds personal meaning for me because I was fortunate enough to work with Patrick and release the Live at Roadburn album. So that's definitely got to be up there. In 2014, Interama played in the Green Room, as it was then. So that was before I worked for Roadburn. I love Interama, and that show, I remember getting there early. So before they started, I was quite near the front, and like the room was just packed. And by the time I didn't even make it to the end, to be honest, but by the time the last I saw of it, I was basically moved out of the room. Like the swell of people just got bigger and bigger, and it was impossible to stay in there. But I love Interama, so that one's a really special one. So how many's that? That's 2. So I've got 3 more. Thou and Mizmore last year
that was
on the main stage, and it was a great performance, but it also represented something. I cried during that set because it was obviously an emotional year last year because there had been such an absence of Roburn for a couple of years, and Thou performing at all at Roburn was a secret until they played their first show, and Thou and Mizmore performing a set was an endeavor which was completely ridiculous to do on many levels. So Thou performing at all, Thou recording an album that they were going to perform with Mizmore, it all seemed like something that just existed out in the ether. And watching that performance, it really hit me that it sounds really like ridiculous, but that Roburn was back and that we had made this thing happen. We can't really take the credit for Thou and Mizmore doing all this wonderful stuff, but yeah, it really was an emotional sort of thing to be like, oh, the magic is still there and this thing has happened and we've pulled it off. So that one was special. And
I can totally sign on for that one, definitely.
Yeah. And I guess my last 2 are connected. So in 2017, Emma Ruth Rundle played in the Green Room, and it was a really emotional performance. And at that time, she'd been on tour in Europe a little while before. She was playing with a full band, and she played Roburn as a solo performance. It was just her and a guitar, and it was so striking. And that's a good example of what we were talking about earlier about emotional weight, emotional heaviness. And it's one of the shows that when Walter and I are talking to each other, but also to other people, we refer back to that as a good example of that. So that show was really special. And since then, I've been lucky enough to become good friends with Emma. So my final choice would be her performance last year on the main stage, which was also an emotional one for me. But I feel very proud of her, and that I'm feeling emotional now talking about it, the artist that she has become, that she has really blossomed into somebody that is not only deserving of playing the main stage, but really commands the main stage. And it was silent the whole time she was performing. It was a performance of her latest album, Engine of Hell, and it was just perfect as far as I'm concerned. She is somebody who has grown from being in the Green Room to being deservingly on the main stage. So yes, I would choose that as my final one.
There are 5 very good choices, I have to say.
Thank you.
So, Becky, when we are recording this, it's less than a week. When we are publishing this, it's less than a handful of days till Roadburn. I'm going to see you in Tilburg next week. And I'm really looking forward to chat and to see amazing artists give amazing performances. Thank you for all the work you're doing, and hope that once the festival starts, you can also enjoy the music that we are being presented. So thanks for all.
Try. Thank you.
You're welcome.